My father's voice cut through the celebration like a knife through silk. Honestly, we wish you were never born. The waiter froze mid-pour. My best friend's fork clattered against her plate. 20 people sat around that table at Marcello's, and every single one of them heard it. Crystal clear, no ambiguity. My own father, in front of colleagues, professors, and friends, declared I was a mistake. But instead of collapsing like he expected, I did something that changed everything. I smiled, not a sad smile, not a broken smile, a smile that said I knew something he didn't. Because in that moment, sitting in that restaurant with my mechanical engineering degree finally in hand, I realized the power I'd been giving away my entire life, and I was about to take it back in a way none of them saw coming. My childhood in Denver was comfortable on paper. Big house in Cherry Creek, private schools, family vacations to Aspen every winter. From the outside, we looked like the American dream wrapped in a Christmas card. But inside that house, there was a hierarchy, as rigid as steel. At the top sat my older brother, Marcus, the heir, the golden son, the one whose name made my parents' faces glow like he'd personally hung the moon. I was 7, the first time I understood my place in the family structure. Marcus had just won some middle school debate tournament. Nothing major, just a local thing. My parents threw him a party. Cake, balloons, relatives flying in from across the state. That same week, I'd won the regional spelling bee, beating kids 3 grades older than me. I remember walking into the kitchen with my trophy, this cheap plastic thing that felt like solid gold in my hands. My mother glanced up from addressing invitations to Marcus's celebration. That's wonderful, sweetie. Put it on your dresser. No party, no phone calls to grandparents, just put it on your dresser. I learned early that achievement wasn't the currency that bought love in our house. Being Marcus was, and I could never be him. So I became useful instead. I became the one who didn't need attention, didn't need praise, didn't need anything. I became invisible, and in my family, invisibility was survival. High school was 4 years of strategic erasure. Marcus played varsity basketball, so the house revolved around his game schedule. Friday nights were sacred. We'd pile into the car, drive to whatever school he was playing at, and watch my parents scream themselves hoarse cheering for him. I spent those nights doing homework in the bleachers, the sound of the crowd drowning out my own thoughts. Junior year, I made first chair violin in the state youth orchestra. The performance was the same night as one of Marcus's playoff games. I didn't even bother asking if they'd come. I already knew the answer. My orchestra teacher drove me to the venue. After we performed, after I played a solo that made the conductor's eyes water, I walked off that stage to a standing ovation from strangers while my own parents sat 30 miles away watching Marcus warm the bench. That night, I made a decision. I'd stop trying to compete for their attention. Instead, I'd build something they couldn't ignore, something so undeniable they'd have no choice but to see me. I chose engineering because it was hard, because it was prestigious, because it was the kind of achievement you couldn't dismiss with a pat on the head and a, "That's nice, dear." I studied until my eyes burned. I took every advanced placement class available. I joined robotics club, math team, science Olympiad. Not because I loved all of it, though I grew to, but because I was building a fortress of achievement so tall they'd have to crane their necks to see the top. Senior year, I applied to MIT, Caltech, Stanford, and Georgia Tech. I wrote essays at 2 a.m, my room lit only by the blue glow of my laptop. My parents never asked about the application process. They were too busy planning Marcus's gap year backpacking through Europe, a trip they funded entirely while I worked weekends at a tutoring center to save for college expenses. When the acceptance letter from MIT came, I held it in my hands and felt nothing. Not joy, not pride. Just a hollow acknowledgement that I'd accomplished something objectively impressive. I walked downstairs where my parents sat watching television. "I got into MIT," I said. "Full ride, mechanical engineering." My father glanced up. "That's good. Practical degree." Then, without missing a beat, he turned to my mother. "Did Marcus call about his flight times?" That was it. No celebration, no pride. Just practical degree, like I'd announced I'd gotten a library card. But I went. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and moved across the country to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who saw me, professors who remembered my name, lab partners who valued my ideas, friends who chose to spend time with me, not out of obligation, but because they actually enjoyed my company. MIT was brutal. The workload was crushing, the competition was fierce, and I spent more nights crying in the bathroom than I'd like to admit. But I also thrived. I joined a research team developing prosthetic limbs with sensory feedback. I published a paper as an undergrad. I won departmental awards. And slowly, painfully, I started to believe I might actually be worth something. My parents visited campus exactly once in 4 years. It was Parents' Weekend my sophomore year, and they came because Marcus was touring Boston College, and it made sense to stop by. We had lunch at a campus cafe. They asked surface-level questions, nodded at my answers, then spent 30 minutes showing me photos of Marcus's study abroad program in Barcelona. When they left, my roommate found me staring at the wall. "Are they always like that?" she asked. I nodded. She hugged me and said something I'll never forget. "You know their inability to see you says everything about them and nothing about you, right?" I wanted to believe her. But belief requires evidence, and I'd spent 20 years collecting evidence to the contrary. Senior year arrived like a freight train. Between my thesis, job interviews, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life, I barely had time to breathe. But I was close, so close to the finish line. My thesis was on adaptive control systems for exoskeletons, complex enough to impress my committee, but practical enough to have real-world applications. Companies were interested. I had 3 job offers before graduation: Boeing in Seattle, Lockheed Martin in Colorado, and a startup in Austin working on accessibility technology. I chose the startup. It paid less, but the mission mattered. They were building affordable mobility devices for people who couldn't access traditional prosthetics. It felt like engineering with purpose, like maybe I could build something that actually helped people rather than just padding a defense contractor's bottom line. When I called to tell my parents I was graduating, there was a long pause. Then my mother said, "Well, that's wonderful. Marcus just got promoted to senior analyst. We're so proud." I'd learned to expect it, but expectation doesn't always dull the blade. I told them MIT had a graduation ceremony, that I'd be walking across the stage, that it would mean something to me if they came. "Of course we'll be there," my father said, and for one foolish, fragile moment, I let myself hope. Maybe this would be different. Maybe a degree from MIT, a job offer, tangible proof of success would finally be enough. I should have known better. I organized a dinner for after the ceremony. Nothing extravagant, just 20 people at Marcello's, an Italian place near campus that had become my comfort spot during stressful finals weeks. I invited my research team, my closest friends, a couple of professors who'd mentored me, and my parents. I paid for everything in advance: a private room, a set menu, wine pairings. It cost me nearly $1,000, money I'd saved from my tutoring job. But I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted one night where I felt celebrated, where the people who actually supported me could toast to 4 years of brutal work finally paying off. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Thousands of graduates in caps and gowns, the spring sun warm on our faces, speeches about changing the world and reaching for the impossible. When they called my name, I walked across that stage and shook the dean's hand, and for 3 seconds, I felt proud. Not hoping someone else would be proud, but actually proud of myself. I found my parents afterward in the crowd. My mother hugged me briefly, careful not to wrinkle her dress. My father shook my hand like I was a business associate. "Congratulations," he said. "Now comes the real work." Marcus hadn't come. He'd texted that morning saying he had a golf tournament he couldn't miss. They'd explained this to me like it was reasonable, like a golf tournament obviously trumped his sister's graduation from MIT. At Marcello's, I tried to shake off the disappointment. My friends were there, laughing, taking photos, making toasts that were equal parts heartfelt and ridiculous. Dr. Reeves, my thesis advisor, gave a speech about my potential that made me tear up. My roommate told embarrassing stories that had the whole table howling. For a while, I forgot about the empty space where my brother should have been sitting. I forgot about my parents' lukewarm reception. I just existed in the warmth of people who actually gave a damn. Then my father stood up. He didn't clink his glass or ask for attention. He just stood, and the table gradually went quiet. I assumed he was going to give a toast, maybe something generic about hard work, about being proud, about the future. I braced myself for mediocrity and told myself it would be enough. I think it's time we were honest, he began, his voice carrying that boardroom authority he'd perfected over decades in corporate law. The table went still. My wife and I have been talking, and we need to address something that's been bothering us for a long time. My stomach dropped. Something in his tone, the way he said honest, like it was a weapon, set off alarms in my head. We've supported you through 4 years of this expensive education, he continued. We've waited patiently for you to figure out what you wanted to do with your life. And now you tell us you're taking a job at some startup, making barely above entry-level pay, after everything we've invested? My friend Sarah's eyes went wide. Dr. Reeves shifted uncomfortably. I couldn't find words. You had offers from real companies, my mother added, her voice tight. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, respectable positions with real salaries. But you chose some idealistic nonsense about accessibility technology. Do you know how that makes us look? The room had gone from silent to suffocating. I could feel 20 pairs of eyes, some on my parents, some on me, all of them witnessing my humiliation in real time. You've always been selfish, my father said, and his voice was so calm, so matter-of-fact. It was almost worse than if he'd yelled. Everything has to be about your vision, your values, your feelings. You never think about the family, about Marcus and how your choices reflect on him, about us and the sacrifices we've made. Something in me cracked. Sacrifices? The word came out sharper than I intended. You didn't pay for MIT. I got a full scholarship. You didn't visit except once. You forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. What exactly did you sacrifice? My father's face darkened. The table was so quiet I could hear the kitchen sounds from behind the closed door, the distant clatter of dishes, someone's muffled laugh. How dare you? My mother hissed. We gave you a home. We fed you. We put up with your constant need for validation, your desperate attempts to compete with your brother. Do you know how exhausting it's been, watching you try so hard to be special when you're just ordinary? The word hung in the air like smoke. Ordinary. 22 years of straight A's, of awards and achievements, and bleeding myself dry for scraps of approval. And I was ordinary. My father leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. Honestly, he said, and this is the part that's burned into my memory like a brand. We wish you were never born. Our lives would have been so much simpler. We could have focused on Marcus, given him the attention he deserves, instead of constantly managing your emotional neediness. The waiter had frozen in the doorway with a tray of desserts. My best friend's fork clattered against her plate. Dr. Reeves looked like he'd been slapped. Sarah had tears streaming down her face. Though I couldn't cry, I was too shocked, too numb. 20 people had just heard my father tell me he wished I didn't exist. And that's when something inside me shifted. Not broke. I'd been breaking for years. This was different. This was a reorganization, a fundamental rewiring of how I saw my place in the world. Because in that moment of absolute humiliation, I realized something critical. Their approval was worthless. I'd spent my entire life chasing something that had no value. I'd been killing myself for scraps from people who saw me as a burden, an inconvenience, a mistake. And if I was already the villain in their story, if I was already the problem, then I had nothing left to lose. So I smiled. Not a sad smile, not a bitter smile. A genuine, calm smile that came from somewhere deep and newly liberated inside me. Okay, I said softly. The single word seemed to confuse them. My father's brow furrowed. My mother's mouth opened slightly. Okay, my father repeated. Okay, I said again, louder this time. You wish I was never born. I understand. That's clear. So here's what's going to happen. I stood up, smoothing my dress with steady hands. The numbness was receding, replaced by a crystalline clarity I'd never experienced before. From this moment forward, I'm giving you exactly what you want. I'm going to act like I was never born into this family. I let that sink in for a beat. Which means you're not my parents anymore. Marcus isn't my brother. I have no family in Denver. I have no history with you. You don't have to manage my emotional neediness because I'm no longer your daughter. My mother's face went pale. You're being dramatic. Am I? I turned to address the entire table now. These people just told me publicly at my graduation dinner that they wish I didn't exist. They've spent 22 years making it clear I'm an obligation, not a choice. So I'm releasing them from that obligation, permanently. You can't just, my father started. I can, I interrupted. I'm an adult, I have a degree from MIT, I have a job, I have friends, I gestured to the table, who actually see me as a human being rather than a burden. I don't need you, and more importantly, I don't want you. The silence was deafening. My father's face had gone from angry to something else, something that looked almost like panic, like he'd just realized he'd miscalculated badly. You're going to regret this, my mother said, her voice shaking. When you need us, when life gets hard, you'll come crawling back. I actually laughed. Need you? I haven't needed you since I was 7 years old. I raised myself, I funded myself, I built myself into someone you couldn't even bother to pretend to be proud of. The only thing I needed from you was love, and you made it abundantly clear that's not available. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts, found their numbers, deleted them both while they watched. Then I blocked them. The small acts felt enormous, each tap of my finger severing a chain. Don't contact me, I said. Don't come to my wedding if I have one. Don't expect to meet your grandchildren if I have them. Don't show up at my door in 10 years pretending this conversation didn't happen. You wanted a life without me. Congratulations, you got it. I turned to my friends. I'm sorry you had to witness that. The appetizers and main courses are paid for. Enjoy dessert without me. Then I looked at Dr. Reeves. Thank you for 4 years of actually seeing me. It meant everything. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my hands steady. Behind me, I heard my mother call my name once, but I didn't turn around. I was done turning around. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment and felt lighter than I had in years. My phone had 17 missed calls and twice as many texts from my parents, each message cycling through anger, bargaining, and attempts at manipulation. I read the first few, then blocked their numbers completely. Then I blocked Marcus for good measure. My friends rallied. Sarah showed up with coffee and sat with me while I ugly cried for an hour, purging years of accumulated pain. Dr. Reeves sent an email saying if I ever needed a reference or just someone to talk to, his door was open. My research team group chat exploded with messages of support, memes, and offers to throw hands with your trash parents. But it was my roommate, Jade, who said the thing that mattered most. You know what's incredible? You just did what most people spend their whole lives wishing they could do. You walked away from people who hurt you. You chose yourself. Chose myself. I'd spent so long trying to be chosen by them that I'd forgotten I could choose me. 3 days later, I signed the offer letter for the Austin startup. I found an apartment online, a 1-bedroom in East Austin with exposed brick and windows that let in ridiculous amounts of sunlight. I packed everything I owned into my car and drove 2,000 miles away from Boston, away from Denver, away from every physical reminder of the people who'd spent 22 years teaching me I wasn't enough. Austin welcomed me like a revelation. The job was challenging in the best way, surrounded by engineers who cared more about impact than prestige. My manager was a woman who'd built her own prosthetic after losing her leg in an accident. And she ran the team with a combination of high standards and genuine compassion I'd never experienced. I made friends quickly, real friends, the kind who showed up when you needed them and disappeared when you needed space. We'd meet for tacos, explore the hiking trails around the city, attend terrible open mic nights, and laugh until our stomachs hurt. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing. I wasn't trying to earn my place. I just existed, and existing was enough. 6 months in, our startup secured major funding. My design for a low-cost knee brace with powered assistance got featured in a disability advocacy magazine. Then a tech blog picked it up. Then suddenly I was doing interviews talking about accessibility and engineering ethics, and my inbox filled with messages from people telling me our work mattered. One email stood out. It was from a mother whose son had cerebral palsy. Our knee brace had given him the ability to walk unaided for the first time in his 8-year-old life. She attached a video of him taking steps across their living room. His face split into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. I watched that video on repeat and cried like a baby. Because this impact, this pure distilled purpose was worth more than 1,000 dinner table approvals from people who couldn't see past their own reflections. A year after graduation, I got an email from Marcus. Subject line: "We need to talk." I stared at it for a full minute before deciding to read it. The message was long, rambling, and boiled down to this: our parents were telling everyone I'd cut them off for no reason. They'd painted themselves as victims of an ungrateful daughter. Marcus himself admitted he'd believed them at first, but recently our aunt had asked him pointed questions about what actually happened at my graduation, and the story wasn't adding up. He wanted to meet. He said he was in Austin for work and had a free evening. I almost said no. Almost, but curiosity won. We met at a coffee shop downtown, one of those places with mismatched furniture and local art covering every wall. Marcus looked the same. Older maybe, but still carrying himself with that easy confidence of someone who'd never had to question whether he was wanted. We sat down. He ordered an espresso. I got tea. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "They told me you lost it at dinner," he finally said, "that you screamed at them, caused a scene, stormed out over nothing." "Is that what they said?" "Yeah. But Aunt Linda talked to your friend Sarah, got a very different version of events." He paused. "She said Dad told you they wished you were never born, in front of everyone." I sipped my tea. "That's accurate." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I didn't know. I knew they favored me, but I didn't realize it was that bad." Something bitter rose in my throat. "You didn't know because you never asked. You were too busy being the golden child to notice I was drowning." "I know." His voice was quiet. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have paid attention. I should have stood up for you." "Why didn't you come to my graduation?" He flinched. "Golf tournament." "You chose golf over your sister graduating from MIT." "I know how it sounds." "Do you?" I leaned forward. "Because here's what it sounds like. It sounds like I was never important enough to rearrange your schedule for, not once in 22 years. And you know what? I'm done being angry about it. I'm done carrying that weight. I want to fix this," he said desperately. "I want us to have a relationship." I studied him, this stranger who shared my DNA but not my history. "Why? Why now?" "Because you're my sister." "I was always your sister, Marcus. That didn't matter before." He didn't have an answer for that. I finished my tea. "Here's the thing, I don't hate you. I don't hate them either, not anymore. Hate requires caring, and I'm fresh out. I've built a life here that doesn't include you, doesn't include them, and it's the happiest I've ever been. I'm not interested in going backwards." "So that's it? You're just done?" "That's it. I'm just done." I left him sitting there and walked out into the Austin evening, the sky painted orange and pink, and felt absolutely nothing except relief. 2 years later, our startup was acquired by a major medical device company for an amount of money that still doesn't feel real when I think about it. My portion was enough to pay off any debt, buy a house, and secure a financial future I'd spent my childhood believing was impossible for someone like me. The acquisition came with a profile in Forbes, one of those 30 under 30 features. They interviewed me about the company, about accessibility technology, about my vision for engineering that serves underserved populations. The article went live on a Tuesday morning. By noon, my phone was exploding. Friends sending congratulations, former professors sharing the article, and then, inevitably, my parents. The email from my father was brief. "Saw your Forbes feature. We're very proud. We always knew you'd do great things. Let's schedule a call to catch up." I read it 3 times, waiting to feel something. Anger, maybe. vindication, the satisfaction of proving them wrong. But I felt nothing. Their pride, arriving 2 years too late and only after public validation, was worthless. It was a currency I no longer traded in. I didn't respond. I deleted the email and went back to work. My mother tried harder. A handwritten letter arrived at my office, forwarded through MIT's Alumni Association because she didn't have my address. The letter was 6 pages of revisionist history, of softened edges and convenient memory gaps. She wrote that they'd always supported me in their own way, that the graduation dinner was a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion, that family should forgive and move forward. The letter ended with a request. Marcus was getting married. They wanted me there. They wanted the family to be whole again. I sat with that letter for a week. Part of me was tempted, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because showing up successful and unbothered would feel like winning. But that was old thinking. That was the version of me who still believed their opinion mattered. I sent back a single sentence on a postcard. I'm not the daughter you wished away anymore. I'm someone better. Last month, 3 years after that graduation dinner, I got invited to speak at MIT's commencement. They wanted me to address the graduating class, to talk about unconventional paths and building meaningful work. Standing on that stage, looking out at thousands of students about to step into their futures, I thought about the girl who'd walked across that same stage, feeling hollow inside despite her achievement. I told them the truth. I told them success without people who love you feels empty. I told them sometimes the people who should support you won't, and that's not a reflection of your worth. I told them the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who diminish you, even if they're family, even if it hurts, even if the world tells you you're supposed to accept mistreatment in the name of blood relation. And I told them this: you get to decide who your family is. Not biology, not obligation. You choose people who celebrate your victories, who support your failures, who see you as a complete person rather than a projection of their own needs. And if the people who raised you can't do that, you're allowed to grieve them and move on. The ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, dozens of students found me, crying, thanking me, telling me stories about their own families, their own journeys toward choosing themselves. And I realized that the girl who walked out of that restaurant 3 years ago, humiliated and heartbroken, had become someone who could offer other people the permission she desperately needed. That night, I had dinner with Dr. Reeves and a few of my old research team members. We laughed about old projects, complained about academic bureaucracy, and toasted to futures we were building on our own terms. My phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. Saw your speech. Mom's crying. She wants to talk. I blocked the number and ordered dessert. Because here's what I learned in those 3 years. Some bridges are meant to burn. Some relationships are meant to end. And the people who tell you they wish you were never born don't get to rewrite history when you become someone they want to claim. I was never the mistake they said I was. I was the one who got away. And every day I wake up in my house in Austin, surrounded by people who chose me. And who I chose back. I'm grateful I did the unexpected. I walked away, and I never looked back. If you've ever been told you're not enough by people who should have protected you, know this: their blindness is not your burden. You are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to grow with you. You are allowed to build a family from scratch, and you're allowed to thrive in their absence. That's not revenge. That's revolution. Share your story in the comments if you've ever had to choose yourself over family. And if you're still fighting for approval from people who can't see your worth, this is your permission slip. Walk away. The life waiting for you on the other side is worth it. Hit subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself when everyone else chose someone else. You're not alone, and your story matters.